Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the overview of the legislature's budget package. I'm assuming that this does not apply to our first two agenda items, AB 75 and 76, because it's my understanding they apply to the current year's budget, but it does apply a little bit to the AB 85, our third item, which is one of several components of the budget. Is that, I just want to clarify that for the record.
Give me 1 second, Senator Moorlach. Through hand signals across the room, our director of the Senate Budget Department says that you are correct.
Then just want to address maybe a comment you made at the onset, and that was that this budget overall would minimize harmful cuts. And I'm just curious what that means.
My point is that our goal is to try to minimize harmful cuts to California residents, recognizing the impact a public health and economic pandemic has done to our state, that it certainly isn't our goal to pass a budget that exacerbates harm. My statement was also in reference to this budget in comparison to, from my perspective, the proposed May revise that had a longer trigger list, that had a trigger list of cuts that went into effect sooner, July 1, versus what our budget bill has proposed to really kind of flip the trigger process and fund the programs up until the point, if the federal dollars don't come in, then we have a plan how to backfill, and our trigger list is shorter. So that's my point.
So then are we anticipating a V recovery where it just came down like a big rock into the lake? Are we expecting it to come right back? Because we're using reserves and assuming revenues from the federal government, and we've been kind of on an upward trajectory, so we're not, I don't see some kind of turn down for the state. I just see that we're going to do a sort of what we can to keep things in place for this year, and then anticipate that the economy just bounces right back.
No, I nor any of us in this committee are that naive, Senator Moorlach. We know that the LAO presented in their spring finance letter, two versions, a L and a U recovery. Mr. Pedek, would you like to respond at all to Senator Moorlach's expressed concern?
Yeah, I can say that I think yes, as Madam Chair said, we did provide a spring outlook, which included a U and an L-shaped scenario.
No, and I'm familiar with that.
Yeah,
Mr. Pedek, maybe I'll ask it a little differently. Has the Department of Finance prepared multi-year budgets to assume what we can expect if we don't get a quick economic rebound? What if this is not a V? What if it's a hockey stick like the Great Recession, where we had a massive drop and then it just was such a slow, long climb out? I'm just wondering if I'm concerned maybe we're depleting all of our reserves and having maybe a higher weight on federal funding than we should be having, and we're not anticipating properly future year trends, and that's what I'm concerned about. Maybe Mr. Viswanathan might be able to answer that question, Madam Chair.
yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator Moorlach. On the question that you raised, typically the Department of Finance, in I guess what you would call more normal times, we have our expected scenario and then we have a recession scenario. So two possible ways in which things can go. Of course, in this situation, by the time we put out our May revision forecast, the economy was already in recession. So while we don't have specific different scenarios of the way that recession can go. Our economic team certainly looked at that, and what they have proposed is basically what they view as the most likely scenario, given all the factors related to the pace of reopening, actions by the Federal Reserve, the latest unemployment data. So all of that is reflected in our economic scenario. And to your point about the possibility of the economic effects of this recession and the COVID-19 pandemic going on from some time, you can see in our outlook that we do see some pretty significant effects, not only in the next year, but over the medium term. And so values of the revenue that we are projecting don't match the revenue that we projected this time a year ago for several years. And when it comes specifically to the reserves that you mentioned, in the May revision, we didn't anticipate the federal funding. We know that how that will ultimately be reflected in the final budget will be the result of whatever three-party agreement comes before the Assembly and the Senate. But certainly in our plan, the budget stabilization account, as well as the safety net reserve and other reserves, those were to be drawn down over a period of 3 years, recognizing that it is likely that even if we make a relatively quicker recovery than some people are expecting, we do expect the Department of Finance to see the effects of this recession for some period of time.
Thank you. Thank you for the thorough answer. Maybe as a follow-up, you're including tax revenues, some $9 million over 3 years, sorry, $9 billion, excuse me. I was under the impression that we wouldn't be raising taxes, but the one example in today's agenda under AB 85 is that we would not allow the utilization of net operating losses for the next 3 years. Being being a certified public accountant and active, we're hitting them by a lockdown of the economy, and so now they're not creating revenues, and they're going to have losses, and the one way to kind of recover from that is to carry those forward and benefit from those deductions. And so now we're hitting them a second time when the economy was shut down by this city, and I'm just wondering why we would take that kind of approach as opposed to trying to help businesses recover, and then they would generate more business, more economic activity, and therefore more tax revenues.
Yeah, so on that issue, I'll speak briefly to it. I also have Jay Chamberlain on the line, and I know I also want to defer to the chair, who I know that bill is a little bit later on the agenda, but I'll say very quickly 2 points on that point. I think the first is that we very much view this as temporary, and that this would be for this calendar year and the next 2 calendar years, and then people who have incurred those losses in the past would be able to use them after that. And if any of those credits were to be expiring in this time period, those net operating losses would carry over for an extended period of time because of this suspension. The second point is that this is very much a temporary measure. Measures somewhat similar to this have been undertaken in previous recessions, and given that the pressures that we're under, we're hoping that everyone can step forward in a very temporary way, and then as the recovery goes on, these net operating losses, the ability to use them will be restored. And then the third point I'll make finally is that we included a specific provision in our proposal that this would only be for taxpayers with income above $1 million. So we want to make sure that very small businesses, mom and top type enterprises, they would not be prohibited from using these net operating losses this year or over the next 2 years. But for entities that do have income above $1 million, we do hope that as part of the overall budget agreement, we can suspend them using those losses just for this short-term period. And then as state revenues recover, as the economy recovers, those with income above that threshold will be able to use those credits in future years.
So I just want to be empathetic to our taxpayers because they pay our salaries. It's their hard work, and they are making the harmful cuts. And it would be helpful that they see that it's a shared experience, that maybe we do need to also make some harmful cuts, and that it doesn't always fall on the shoulders of our taxpayers. And that's just an observation, Madam Chair. Thank you very much.